Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I'm the actor.
My name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
Here we go again.
So I'm going to call this Mother Redux, kind of like Apocalypse Now Redux. So we did something stupid about a year ago. We said when we were doing our Mother, the movie directed and written by Darren Aronofsky, we were doing our Mother episode. We said, we should revisit this in a year because we were both, I definitely said, I could be totally wrong, but this is exactly what I think that this movie is about. And we said, well, we'll revisit it in a year. So it's been a year and I rewatched it again and so did you. And now we're here.
Okay, I would just like to state for the podcast record that it was you who said we should rewatch it in a year.
I did.
And you who said we should revisit it in a year. And I said, okay, because I was not overly enthused about rewatching it in a year, but I actually think it's quite a brilliant idea. So maybe I should take credit for it. But you also sent me a podcast where it was the DGA podcast where it was director on director, and it was Darren Aronofsky being interviewed by William Friedkin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so that to me, listening to that podcast made me say, yes, I want to see the movie again after watching the podcast or listening to the podcast so I can see if I see what Darren Aronofsky was talking about in the film. And I also think that he calls him Billy. William Friedkin's disposition and attitude and the way he interviews Darren Aronofsky is very drill sergeant-like, and it's thrilling because you can't mess with Billy because he has an Oscar and Darren doesn't, and he's this big, huge director who's made these massively huge films that Darren Aronofsky is a person of his own time, but you can't really disrespect.
I think it's old Hollywood versus new Hollywood. I think that's the dynamic. And it's nobody's ever questioned William Friedkin on how he interacts with people because he's able to get away with it because he's the director of The Exorcist, and he's the director of, name it. So I think that's the kind of attitude that he was coming at it with, and the attitude that Darren Aronofsky's coming at it with is more like of a, he's trying to be a little bit more enigmatic and trying to allow people different views and to allow people to interpret his film in a particular way that they want to, and not trying to close doors. Whereas William Friedkin is definitely trying to close doors. He's trying to say I'm going to nail you down in this 30-minute interview, and you're going to tell me not only what this movie means, but what your personal faith journey is. And to me, that's a little extreme.
Okay, so then it is extreme, but then don't go on the show. Okay, if you want to be elusive and you want to be mysterious about what your thoughts on your own film are, then don't go on the show. So when William Friedkin had his interpretation of what Mother was, Darren Aronofsky says, Billy got it.
Yeah.
Everyone, he got it. Even though he's talking about something completely different when he was talking about the religious allegory, which I see way more, and we can get into that later on, than this Mother Earth thing that Darren Aronofsky is talking about. So he was not asking him what he thought other people's interpretation of his film was. He was asking the director where he was coming from in this film. And then he said, my interpretation is this, meaning William Friedkin said, my interpretation is this. So one, don't go on the show if you don't want to give anything away about your film. And two, there is this huge, prominent, historic director asking you these questions, and you have sort of an obligation to answer them. So I think it's bizarre that you want to be what did you say? Enigmatic? What's the word? What's the word I'm looking for?
Enigmatic?
Yes, thank you. I couldn't say that word after saying freaking for so many times, and I don't think I'm saying that exactly right either. But anyway, the point is that if you want to be mysterious about your film, then don't talk about it at all. Don't analyze it. Don't say it's an allegory. Don't say it's this. Don't say it's that. Let people interpret it. So what I found fascinating about that is he does kind of try to pin him down with what his views of this film are and his religious views and all this other stuff. And I think that Darren Aronofsky answers all of those questions appropriately. He says, these are stories to some people. They're religious beliefs to other people. To me, they're just stories. He mentions Icarus. Everybody knows that story, but nobody really believes that ever happened. And that's how he feels about the Bible. And I think that's an answer to the question. I also think it's very touchy and a slippery slope to ask somebody such personal questions, because no answer is going to fulfill everybody's needs. Because if you say you're not religious and you don't believe in God, people are in an uproar about that. And if you say you do, people are in an uproar about that. So my thing that I found curious about the podcast and then watching the film is to try to transfer what Darren Aronofsky said he was trying to get into the film. I was trying to extract it the second time that I saw it, and I have an answer for that.
How did that go? Because for me, I watched it a second time after knowing all of this stuff, and I even re-listened to the podcast. I re-listened to our podcast, and I was still, I still saw what I saw the first time I saw the movie, like if that makes any sense. So I saw the movie, we did the podcast, I said what I felt the movie was about. After reading all this stuff and listening to all this stuff and watching the movie again, I still got those same things from the movie, but I also was able to see what he was trying to do and the allegory that he was trying to use. And things did fall into place a lot better, but it still didn't take away from what I felt initially. And I don't think I'm being stubborn. I just think that it's just another way to go about storytelling. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he hit the nail on the head as much as he maybe thought he did.
I felt the exact same way about the film the first time I saw it also. I don't see the allegory as clearly as Darren Aronofsky possibly wanted us to, or maybe he doesn't want us to. I'm not sure what he wanted us to feel. I feel like the same, and I don't know if I said this on the podcast, maybe you can let me know. I feel like the first 45 minutes of the film is the film. Then everything that happens after Michelle Pfeiffer and Ed Harris leave is repetitive motion over and over and over and over and over and over again. We get the point. People came to visit. This is their home. It's an intimate place. We don't want people putting cigarette butts out in our place. We don't want people smoking. We don't want people killed. We don't want blood. We don't want Michelle Pfeiffer and her little panties. We don't want any of that in our intimate space. And I get if that's an allegory for Mother Earth and how we're destroying Mother Earth and we're just like living off the land and burning things down and smoking and whatever the chemicals are that are going up into the air that's ruining or contributing to global warming. I believe all of that does exist. First of all, me personally, the science states that. I don't know much about the science, but I don't know why anybody would make that up. One, and two, even if it's not for real, global warming, why not have a way to respect the planet that we live on? There's no reason that we need to just like abuse it because, okay, global warming doesn't really exist. Humans aren't really releasing carbon monoxide, which is making the environment bad. Okay, that's not really happening. But then how do we get people to understand and respect the frickin' planet? Like, why don't we? So that's a whole nother subject. But did I see that allegory in the first 45 minutes of the film? Yes, I did. From that point on, it's an exaggerated, I want to say mess, but I don't want to be disrespectful to what Darren Aronofsky wanted. I don't see why we needed all of those people, all of those situations, the baby, her being beaten up. I don't see why. If the point is that we are abusing our home, we get that. And we don't need anything to happen after Michelle Pfeiffer and Ed Harris leave. As a matter of fact, not at all to assume I could redirect or rewrite something. But for me, it would have been more interesting if he had taken his time. It's in the first 4 minutes that Ed Harris knocks on the door. He's right there. Mm-hmm. You get no time with just the two in the house. I think he should have just taken his time. I think his film is there. It could have been an interesting character study. It could have been an interesting allegory. It could have been an interesting metaphor for all of those things that I think he wanted us to get from it. And then also on top of that, with an allegory, are you supposed to be able to extract that even after you find out it's an allegory and it's an allegory for abusing Mother Earth? Are you supposed to be able to see that in a film, or is an allegory just an image or a pattern of images that mean something other than what their literal meanings are? So in other words, am I supposed to be able to see that the house and Jennifer Lawrence are Mother Earth? Am I supposed to see that all the woodwork in the house is supposed to represent Mother Earth? Am I supposed to see that? Or is it supposed to be so hidden in an allegory?
I think you are supposed to see that, because otherwise, from what he said in the podcast, he said, I could have made a documentary about the founder of Greenpeace, and there may be a good documentary there, but I'm not the filmmaker to make that. That's what he said. And he also said that this movie Mother is like, it's a scream of rage against what people are doing to the environment. And so that's the way that he felt like as an artist that he could convey his feelings for what people are doing to the environment, which is valid and completely fine. But you're right, if that doesn't come across, and either I just didn't see it because maybe I wasn't in tune enough with the imagery that he was portraying, But I don't know. First of all, I haven't talked to many other people who've seen the movie, so that's another, I don't know, strike on this movie. But it's not necessarily a movie that's in the cultural zeitgeist, first of all. And secondly, the fact that neither one of us got it at all. And I feel like we're pretty good at picking up on things that filmmakers try to do. That is concerning to me on a personal level, that it's like, how could I completely miss this thing that the writer director was meant to be showing me? And I don't know how much fault to put on the writer director, or how much fault to put on me, but it wasn't effective for me the first time.
Right. But then you know what he meant and it still doesn't resonate, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, I see he doesn't go into a lot of description in the DGA podcast about what I would have liked to have known. He should have asked him about an example of what made this imagery mean something that it wasn't. Like, what the hell is she drinking? What is that orange, yellow, pea looking stuff that she's drinking? And it makes her feel better. So does that mean when she dumps it down the toilet, when she's pregnant, does that mean that that's what makes the house feel better for the 9 months that she's pregnant? That's why the house doesn't act up while she's pregnant. I mean, it's just so many things. And I slowed it down to see what was on that bottle that whatever. And that has a very specific sound effect with it, because I rewound it a couple of times to watch it in slow motion, because I saw the movie all the way through. And then I was like, okay, now I'm going to go back through it and fast forward through things and find things that I'm trying to figure out what that is and what I'm taking from that. And there's a very specific sound effect that happens when she pours that orange powder. Actually, it's a very strange color. It's not even orange.
It's like a sparkly color, yeah.
Yeah, and it has this shimmer to it, and it has this sound effect. And when she throws it down the toilet, when she pours it down, that sound effect happens too. Yeah. And that sound effect happens as it's being flushed. Yeah. So that's purposeful. But if I can't extract from that something, I'm not talking about what Darren Aronofsky thinks, what Josh Knapp thinks, what William Friedkin thinks, what Paul James thinks, what I felt when I saw it. I felt confused and as if I was listening to Shakespeare when I was 3 years old and I didn't understand it. And I will never understand it. When I heard Shakespeare when I was in the 6th grade or whenever I first heard it, I knew I didn't understand it, but I knew I could understand it. I knew there were things there that could allow me to understand it. There are things in this movie that even if he fully explains it to me, I don't think I'm ever going to feel that. And that's an issue for me. I don't need for you to spoon feed me anything. But when I took an art history class, and I've made reference to this many times, and I learned why those Corinthian columns look the way they look, and the Ionic columns, the reason why they use those in Roman times, the reason behind those things definitely influenced how I see those things now. That's interesting to me, and they all have a purpose. I thought it really looked cool to begin with, period, and I always liked that kind of Roman column, and the tops of them look different, and there's 3 different types. I can't remember the third type, but Ionic, Corinthian, and what else? There's 3.
Doric.
There it is. Thank you, sir. I would have never remembered that until it's like 3:00 in the morning. I woke up screaming it. Anyway, the point is that it doesn't help me understand those columns any better. It doesn't help me have an emotional reaction to those columns anymore. It does explain it, but I still had some form of emotional effect from those columns. Okay, it's a strange way to put this and a strange analogy, but I did. Certain ones make me feel like a king lives underneath that one. Certain ones look like there's some kind of jungle scene underneath that one. You get some form of feeling. Do you understand where I'm going with this? Mm-hmm. And when you see these things in the film, you're thinking, is this just Darren Aronofsky's obsession with hearts in places they shouldn't be, or brains with tentacles? Because he has a thing about that. Because they're in quite a few of his movies, or does it have a reason? What the hell is the thing that comes up in the toilet bowl? What is that?
I think the same thing is like when Ed Harris is puking and they cover up the scar on his side. The only thing I could think of with that is that's where a rib would be. So that must have been like where they extracted the rib to make Eve, to make so there's that, but I don't know what the thing in the toilet is though. That like spews blood or whatever. I don't know what that is, but
I think that's amazing that's what you extracted from it, because I would have never thought that's why Ed Harris has that scar. That's actually brilliant. And the religious allegory, I see no problem. That I see. That makes way more sense to me than the other thing about Mother Earth. It's obvious Cain and Abel. It's obvious Adam and Eve. It's obvious that this is the Garden of Eden. And it's obvious that Javier Bardem, and he says it at the end of the film, I am I. Yeah. And he's God. And she is Mother Earth, I guess. It just jumps right there for me. I don't necessarily see that connection. Why are the two together? Now, Darren Aronofsky has a thing about religion. I think he was raised Catholic.
No,
he wasn't
he's Jewish.
Raised Catholic. Oh, he's Jewish. Really?
Yeah, he's definitely Jewish.
Who mentions that they're Catholic then? Somebody mentions that they're Catholic. Does he?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Catholic made The Exorcist.
Imagine that.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I guess you're right. He is Jewish. Anyway, then that also brings up a lot of different questions. The New Testament is not something that the Jewish faith believes actually happened. So they believe that the Messiah has not come yet. Mm-hmm. That's something that they believe. It's a core belief of their religious values. And I find that fascinating that some people believe that Christ was the Son of God, and some people believe he's just a prophet, and just some people don't think he exists. I find that interesting. So what is the Jewish guy doing writing an allegory about Christ or about God?
Well, I don't think that he's Jewish.
I'm not saying it is.
I mean, that's what he danced around. I don't think that he is a practicing, practices the Jewish faith. I think that he grew up Jewish, but I don't know if he holds those tenets, and lives by those tenets. I mean, he's definitely not, he's not a Hasidic Jew or anything like that. I mean, he doesn't have those practices in his everyday life. So, and that's why he was trying to kind of dance around that. I mean, obviously the culture has affected him and has brought him to this moment where he made this movie. But I think that his view of God, it seems like he believes in a God of some kind, but it seems like his view of God is a really selfish God and needy God, which is kind of like opposite of my view of God. So that's why it's hard for me to kind of like, I have to look at it from his point of view as opposed to looking at this movie from my point of view. And that's, you have to kind of like set all your stuff up on the shelf and then be like, okay, now we're watching something that this guy thinks, and now I have to put myself in his point of view as opposed to bringing my faith to this movie, and it because it doesn't ring true to me. The way that God acts doesn't ring true to me in this movie. If in fact Javier Bardem is the God of the movie. So that's that. Maybe that's why I missed it the first time. But the fact that you have this like, he's never satiated. It doesn't matter how many people show up or how many people tell him he's awesome. It's never enough. And it doesn't matter how many things he gives to them, whether it's his house or whether it's this baby, this Christ child, that they, use in the allegory. It's never enough. He never feels, fulfilled enough to be their God. He always needs more. So that's just not my view of God. So, that's, it's a different thing.
Yeah. It would be something somebody who was raised in the Jewish faith would be more inclined to look at, because the Old Testament is filled with a God who is wrathful and vengeful and does do things like, hey, kill your son for me. Oh, just kidding. Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, but there's.
But thank you.
I don't know. We can get into it. We can get into.
Well,
that
I mean, that is what's in the Bible.
It is in the Bible, but that's not necessarily the way that you have to interpret those scriptures. I mean, there are cultural things you can bring into those scriptures that say that, like, that. I mean, you're talking about Abraham and Isaac, and so Abraham knew when, I would venture to say that Abraham knew when God told him to go to that place, that Abraham knew that he wasn't going to sacrifice his son. And, we can get into it if you want, but it's...
Wait, what? That's not the point of the story, though. The point of the story is that he did it anyway, thinking that he was going to kill his son, that he had faith in God, that God was going to make some kind of decision. I don't think that he once said, no, I don't think he's really going to kill my son.
No, he didn't say that.
I don't think...
No, he didn't say that. But it's a little bit more nuanced than that. But you can go through and say, yes, you can take these scriptures and you can bend them to whatever will you want. But I think that it's harder for me to say that God changed from the Old Testament to the New Testament because God is separate from time. So that doesn't make logical sense that God changed. So there's different ways to read the scriptures that make sense to me in a logical sense that fall in place to where it's not like the God of the Old Testament that asked Abraham to kill his son is not the same God that brought Jesus to earth to cover our sins. So it doesn't make sense for me on a logical level to say that those are two different gods,
and it's okay that we can get into this a little bit. It feels like you're almost hesitant because we don't really talk about our personal religious beliefs or our personal faith on this show. Yours being completely different than mine, and that's what makes it interesting for me, that you come from a completely different point of view. But the point of view that you have, I know about because I was raised in a very religious family, and I think it did more good than bad. Let me first state that so everybody doesn't think I'm bashing on being raised Catholic and all that stuff. A lot of great things came from that. It's just not my thing. It just doesn't ring true to me as an adult. It doesn't mean that I think it's a bad thing or that they should be condemned. I would never say that. There's a lot of great people who walk in the light of Christ. I love them, and they have represented the right side of that, meaning the light of the Lord. And that sounds hokey and quirky and strange to say, but they represent, you being one of them, your wife being another.
Thank you.
That said, you're welcome. It's the truth, though. You put no pressure on anybody to believe what you believe, ever. But you represent for what you believe on a daily basis in the way that you act as a human being. And that's a great thing. How could that be a bad thing? And if that's Christ doing that through you, I'm all about it. I'm like, okay, because he's walking in that light. And I know many people like that who are really believers and their faith is strong, but they're really just great human beings based on this faith. And I can't fault that. I never have and I never will. That said, you cannot deny that the Old Testament is written in a way that God in the Old Testament does things that are in conflict to what God does in the New Testament, because God does different things in the Old Testament. He sends a flood and kills all of mankind. That happens. He decides to create and I'm not making a statement about it personally. I'm saying what's in the Bible is this. He creates Eden, paradise, and he still feels something's missing. So he creates man, then creates woman, then gives them the ultimate temptation. You can have anything in this garden except for don't eat from the tree of knowledge. What? Wait. Okay, so what's God really doing in that is a whole nother podcast. But the point is, that's a bit, I don't want to say sadistic because that's too strong of a word, but that's a bit mind-bending. Why create these creatures out of love? Because he was lacking something to love. And the angels are having a fit about this, by the way. They're like, wait, what? He has all of us and now he needs more? And he's going to create an infallible creature to get this love? Okay, what's going on here? Those are things in the Bible. It's not it's not a matter of interpretation. That's what happens. So we as human beings now need to interpret that to make it work for our lives. That's what I think is brilliant about the Bible. But those things do happen. So you can say for you personally, the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament are in conflict with what your beliefs are, meaning it doesn't add up for you, but it doesn't change the fact that that's what happens in Scripture.
Well, I never said that. I said the God of the Old Testament is the same as the God of the New Testament, but that's which makes sense on a logical level. But saying that there are two totally separate gods, there's a wrathful God and a loving God, that doesn't make sense to me because that is the one and the same God. So the way that the interactions between God and humans that are represented in the Old Testament are different than the interactions between God and humans in the New Testament. I will agree to that, but I won't agree that God completely changes his mind. It's just phases in his interactions with people, as far as the how people deal with how people used to deal with their interactions with the environment or with Mother Earth. They never really knew what was going on when they would have a year where they would have horrible crop production, and then the next year they would have great crop production. They attributed it to some sort of lack in their relationship with the one above, with God. And so one way to kind of give people a way to see their status in the Old Testament would be, hey, you need to give me some you need to cut a ram in half, and you need to go take these doves and you need to kill them on an altar. You need to do all those things, and then you'll be good with me. And that actually gave them comfort, as opposed to never knowing what their situation was. And in the New Testament, that those types of sacrifices were transitioned into an ultimate sacrifice in Jesus. So that is a difference in how we interact with, and this is all my opinion, man, and how we interact with God versus how people interacted with God in the Old Testament. So that's just one example of how something like why did they have to do, sacrifices back then? Why don't we have to do sacrifices now? Or why don't we feel like we have to do sacrifices now? It's a difference in how we would interact with them. As far as specific things that happened in the Old Testament, yes. You can go through, and there's different conversations you can have. You can have literal conversations with, saying did this physically happen, or did that physically happen? Or you can say that did the representation of these relationships between people in the Old Testament, how do those inform me today? that's a more interesting conversation to me, much like what Darren Aronofsky was saying, actually, when
totally.
when Friedkin was like, "Hey, do you believe in this or do you not?" And it's like, that's boring. That's kind of boring. Were we created, was the world created in 5,000 years and were there dinosaurs? Like, that's also boring. We need to move past all of that, and we need to start talking about how we interact with each other. That's the more interesting thing. And what can we learn from the writings of the Bible and the writings of the people who lived in those times and how that relates to us now? Those are the things that I'm more interested in. And I don't like to get hung up on semantics, and I don't like to get hung up on the fact that there is, coming back to the fact that there is a vengeful God and there is a loving God, because you're kind of giving up both of those things in a lot of ways by saying this was the old God, this is the new God. It's kind of like a humanistic way of looking at something that we can barely even comprehend. So that's where I get a little defensive when people start saying this is a horrible, God in the Old Testament or whatever.
And don't get me wrong, that's not what I was trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that based on what I just saw in this movie, that's what Darren Aronofsky's take on the God in the Old Testament is.
Yes,
because
I agree.
That's how totally. And that's the point to our whole divergence of a conversation about the Bible. It's not about the Bible. This conversation is not about your religious beliefs or my religious belief or my spiritual beliefs or your spiritual beliefs. That's not what this conversation is about. This conversation is about those things based on what we saw in his film and what we know about his film and what we've read about the film and what we analyzed about the film and what we heard him talk about. And I've read quite a few reviews, and everybody is all over the place with this movie, which I think is ultimately a compliment to Darren Aronofsky. But my point is that I don't really care, and I'm not that interested in whether or not somebody thinks the God of the Old Testament is vengeful or wrathful, or if he's peaceful and loving because he sent his only begotten Son in the New Testament. That doesn't interest me as much as, why am I not extracting that from the film if that's what Darren Aronofsky wanted? That said, the other side to that is that I get to extract what I want from the art. The art is in the eye of the beholder. That brings me to my ultimate point about this movie. There is nothing to hang my need of analytical understanding of a movie on this film. There's nothing in the film that keeps me questioning why I saw what I saw, why I felt what I felt. I felt what I needed to feel, and I'm telling you, in the first 45 minutes, and then it's done. I don't feel anything new. I don't feel any kind of revelation or epiphany, or not that there has to be, where's the catharsis? Give me some catharsis. That's from the play I'm doing, by the way. I don't feel any of that. And I'm wondering, is it because I don't have the understanding or the knowledge that I need to have as a film watcher? Or have I not matured enough as a film watcher to understand those things? Or are they just not there and he thinks they are? That's the question. The question is not what your belief is, not what my belief is, but what are we supposed to believe about this movie? And it leaves me, it should be mother question mark, not mother exclamation point. It's not that for me. It's not that I don't get this movie. It's just, there's something not there for me. I don't know what it is. It's just not there. I want to understand, why is she walking around in a see-through negligee? Why is she walking around barefoot? Now that makes sense, barefoot and pregnant later on. Why are the closets painted the color that they're painted? And why is the dresser the way that the dresser is? And why is that rug being chosen? Why? Usually I can attach my emotional need to a film and say, oh, that rug represented this kind of cloth back in the day, and that represented somebody's penance, or that color of that nightstand represented this for me. I can attach my emotional need onto the film, and I can't do it for this one. I cannot figure out where I belong in this film. Where am I in this film? I don't feel anything. And that's, unique for me because I am the most emotionally charged person in the world when it comes to watching movies. But there's just something not there for me. There's a void. And if that's what he wanted, then he succeeded. And I do want to bring this up because, and I know this is kind of like a jump in subject matters, but it's still on the same line. The only thing I felt during this film was, the second time especially, was that Darren Aronofsky might want to look into how he feels about women. Because the way that he treats women, if looked at in the wrong way, might not make him look so great. First of all, they call her the "see you next Thursday" word twice in this film, which I don't understand. Why are you using that terminology, CUNT, to describe a woman who is Mother Earth? Is that supposed to be the ultimate abuse of a person who's living on this earth, who just like throws trash out of their car and all that? It's the worst possible case scenario. It doesn't feel like that to me. It feels like he has some kind of personal issue that he's taking out on his film and now on us. That's the only thing I extracted from this movie a second time.
Wow.
And I'm not saying that I think that Darren Aronofsky has a problem with women. I'm saying that if somebody wanted to analyze that, it could be there. Like, why the hell does she get so beaten up at the end of the film? We don't get the fact that people have moved into Mother Earth and put cigarettes out in Mother Earth and slopped laundry all over the place. And we don't get that. You have to have a child's neck broken and her beat to a pulp in order for us to understand that. I don't get it. It didn't add up. And yet another question, and I'm jumping. Why the hell does she steal the lighter, and why the hell does she steal the underwear? Why does she hide their things? You know what I'm talking about?
She steals the lighter so she can light it later on. Light the oil later.
No, she pushes it off the dresser as if to be spiteful towards Ed Harris.
Yeah, so
it just happens to come back into play.
Yeah, so he can't light up his cigarette, but he comes in and lights up a cigarette anyway.
Off the kitchen, out of the kitchen. Mm-hmm. So why does she hide Michelle Pfeiffer's underwear? I'm not asking you to answer those questions. I'm wanting to feel some answer inside my soul of why she did those things. Mm-hmm. And it's so elusive to me, I don't feel anything.
Well, I guess I'll be a little bit more generous about it. What I looked for this time was shot selection and use of the set and how he was able to make something that was kind of like a closed offset, breathe and be bigger. And I think he did a good job in that. So on a technical level, it's a well shot movie for what it is. But I didn't, much like you, I didn't get connected with his primal scream of what the people are doing against the earth. And I think a lot of it probably has to do, and I was pretty defensive of the movie the first time we talked about it, especially the end of the movie where it just kind of like went off the rails at the end. And that's his whole kind of like, you could say it's like a revelation type thing. Like, this is the end times, all of that stuff. You could go there, but it's extreme. And it seems like it's kind of like him saying like, be careful what you wish for. You just might get it, that whole thing, which to me nowadays, especially, like, people are really cynical, and I'm pretty cynical too, but it doesn't land as well as I think it could have landed, especially with the setup, like what you were talking about, the first 45 minutes of the movie. And you do get to see that at the end. But one reason why I think that he does have the shot selections that he does is that it's either like, it's like 3 shots. It's like either like over her shoulder, like a close up on her or her point of view. Those are the only 3 shots. Like every once in a while there's a wide shot, but it's very rare. And so that's supposed to
I think he said there were 4 in the film,
oh,
4
okay.
wide shots.
Yeah, maybe a wide shot too, I guess. But that's supposed to keep us in her point of view and keep us sympathetic with her from a filmmaking standpoint. And I think that does work. But the other thing that it did was when we talked about this movie initially, we talked about how Jennifer Lawrence wasn't used well. She wasn't given enough to do. And I think a lot of that may have to do with the fact that we were kind of like her, and as the audience if the filmmaker's trying to make the audience a character, ultimately that, first of all, we're not used to as film goers, we're not used to that setup. We're not used to being a character. We're more used to seeing we're used to seeing what that character is portraying, and we're taking that in. But in this movie, Jennifer Lawrence didn't really get the chance to do that because of the shot selection and because of what she was asked to do. So I think that may be, I don't know if we hit the nail on the head with that the first time, but I think that after seeing it a second time, that is the problem with how, or with her, it's not a problem with her performance. It's a problem with what Darren Aronofsky asked her to do. And that, I think, helped me to solidify that.
We definitely talked about that on the original podcast.
We did.
Because my point was, it's not that she wasn't great at what she did. It's repetitive what she does. She's given kind of one note to play the whole entire time. It's not that I couldn't relate to what she was doing. It's not, and I'm not so big on this over-the-shoulder shot and this kind of kinetic kind of jumping angle that he gets when he comes around to her face. And it's fine. He's used that technique before, and I like it. I think it's okay. And I don't necessarily have an issue with not having the position of being in that character's frame of mind from their point of view. We're not used to that. We're usually used to watching it, like you were saying. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I just think that what does she do other than say, don't sit on that. Hey, you can't do that.
She paints.
We don't smoke in the house. Don't do. She paints. Yeah. And she cooks.
Yeah.
And yeah. But I'm also talking about in the conflicts. What does she do? What other than, now she has a couple of really great moments, and she is just superb. Her moment-to-moment work as a film actress is brilliant. When Javier Bardem says something about my publisher really loved it, and she gets this kind of dejected look on her face, like, I loved it too. You don't care about what I think about it. So there is that.
She was more offended that the publisher read it before she read it.
Right. Then you have that moment. Right. Exactly. Then you have that moment. So that's layering it to a degree. But you get all of that in that one conversation with Michelle Pfeiffer early on in the film. Oh, you do love him. Oh, that whole conversation about, you're going to be there for him and only him and all this other stuff. And all of your needs are based on his needs. I'm not even coming close to what the dialogue was, but you get the point. So once that conversation happens, where do we take it from there? And that is probably going to be my main thing, and probably my only thing about this podcast and this subject again, is that if he found a way, there is no first, second, and third act in this movie. There's a first act and a second act, and they're the same. The second act is just bigger. And I go back to something I said about the film in the first podcast. I still think it was a mistake to do these intimate shots inside of a house that were so large and over the top, bonfires and gunfire and people getting killed in these wars and all this other stuff. It's exciting as hell when they look out the window and you see all the flashlights of all the people walking across the field. That's epic to me. That has this feeling of them overtaking the earth. If he had said that was a metaphor, a visual metaphor for how we just trample on the earth, I would have said, yes, I felt something like that. I'm not saying I felt that, but I felt something. So the whole, all of the over-the-top party sequences, for lack of a better term, just don't work for me because it's so crammed into one little set that I can't get the enormity of what he wanted. And that's probably, it's what he wanted, obviously. He wanted to shoot these large things in small areas. It just does not look real. It doesn't look realistic. It doesn't look like there's an actual war going on inside the house. And I don't ever want to assume to say, well, if he did this, this would have worked, because these are the choices he made. But for me, if there had been, and I mentioned this in the first podcast, if there had been some way he could have expanded the rooms, you know, that whole shot down a hallway thing that they do in films where the camera, the hallway looks like it's getting longer, although the camera's moving away at the same time.
So dolly zoom.
If he had done something, yeah, is that what it is? I love that you know that. If he had done something like that, then it would have felt large to me, instead of it feeling like a college student was filming their, you know, project, their last film project, and they had a lot of money to do it. So they did all these crazy over the top things, but didn't have the space to do it in. So they did it in this house. It doesn't feel right to me. And it's not that I say that that's right or wrong, meaning that's a good choice or a bad choice on Darren Aronofsky's side. It's not that, because I would never want to be that kind of person who said that sucked because blah, blah, blah. I don't know anything about why he made what he made. But for me, watching it, I felt unconnected to it because it didn't seem realistic to me. I even like when Kristen Wiig comes in. That brings this sense of reality to it, because not only is she a uber famous person, but she's playing against type. And I love stuff like that. And she's actually presenting a side of that world that we see a lot of times in films, but it needed to be represented. And I like how she calls Jennifer Lawrence, oh, it's the inspiration. Come here, inspiration. I love that, because now you have a clear-cut understanding of what's happening here. You have an inspiration being influenced by the mainstream not media, but the mainstream machine that's going to take over this writer and turn him into this big pop star. And this poor little inspiration is standing in the corner, and she doesn't really ever get celebrated or anything like that. So that's a realistic take on something. And then when you see what happens to Kristen Wiig later on, that all makes sense to me, because that's a statement about the machine and how it works and how it's going to trample over us, but we need to take it out when we can. I get all that. So that worked for me. But the other larger than life stuff at the end of the film, I would love to sit down in a film class and have somebody explain to me what was meant so I could extract how I felt out of it. But I don't think that's how art works for me. I extract something out of it. I feel something. I have an emotional response to it. Then somebody explains to me, oh, this is what it meant. And I go, okay, well, that's totally cool, but that's not what I felt. But still, I even understand it more. Mm-hmm. And this film just doesn't do it for me. It just, I don't think, and by the way, you said I'm going to be more generous about this film. I don't think that I'm being less generous. I just think I'm perplexed. And that might sound like, I don't want to be rude and I don't want to be disrespectful. I want to understand this movie on some kind of level. No one had to explain pi to me. I watched that movie and I completely got something out of it. I understood it on my level, what I took from it. You know, all of his films, actually. I even enjoyed The Fountain, and I took way more out of that movie than most people took out of it. So I don't want to be disrespectful. I want to understand what this piece of art is supposed to be making me feel, or I want to feel something more than what I felt when I saw this piece of art.
Yeah, I think that specifically from the interview that we both listened to between him and William Friedkin, it seems like this is a film where there is a right answer. And I don't feel like I got that answer. It sounds like you didn't get that answer. And so to me, on a, kind of like an empirical level, like I feel like, it's not that I feel like I've failed, but I feel like somebody has failed in this scenario. And, I'm not willing to necessarily say that it's only me. It's probably a combination of me and, Darren Aronofsky. And by the way, just to circle back on Kristen Wiig's character, it sounds like after hearing that interview and seeing the movie again, it seems like Kristen Wiig's character is supposed to represent religion, not faith, but religion, like the machine of religion. So, they're the ones that are responsible for taking God and putting God into and allowing God to interact with the people. So she's the publisher. She's the one who's getting the book out there. So that, and then of course the religion slides down and down and down to the point where she's literally shooting people in the head. So, I mean, that's I think his view of, like, you start off as, it starts off as this publisher thing that's good, that gets the word out there, but then it quickly devolves into just sacrificing things and just laying waste to people. So that's...
Let me just interrupt, because that's exactly my point. That makes me feel so much better that you just said that, because I didn't necessarily connect Kristen Wiig's character to what he believes religion is doing to us. I didn't connect that, but I felt something. And now that that's the explanation, I can say to myself, that's what I felt. I felt that. I felt that she was obscuring the truth of this artist. She was taking people out, even though she wanted people to buy his work. I felt that. And now when you attach that literal meaning to it, I go, okay, that makes sense. I'm not sure that's what I would have interpreted as, but I felt something was there. And it lit up when Kristen Wiig was on screen. It's because that symbol, that metaphor, that allegory, whatever the hell the term is, because I looked them all up and they're all really confusing. Because a metaphor and an allegory are close, but they're not. I mean, it can be very confusing. Anyway, the point is that I felt that, and I feel like there are other things in this film that I should have had some kind of connection to, good, bad, or ugly, that might not have had a literal explanation for me at the time, and nor did I need one, but I needed to feel that when watching the film. And I don't think, as many times as I might venture into this movie, the next time I venture into it, it's got to be because somebody else wants to watch it and I'm there. Other than that, I don't know of any free will that's going to possess me to see this film again, unless I go to a film class, or unless Darren Aronofsky wants to explain it to me. Then I'll watch it again. But I just think that you and I are invested in film on a level where we want to be open to those suggestions, imagery, metaphors, allegories, poems, words, lyrics. We want to be of an understanding of why the artist put that in front of us. And even if we can't say it in words, or I can't say it in words, I have got to have it somewhere in my being in order to say, I got something out of this film. And this film starts out getting inside me, and then all of a sudden, I just thought of this weird analogy. You ever seen the movie The Crow?
No.
Okay. Well, there's a scene where somebody is shooting up in that film, and he comes upon her and says, "You don't really want to do that." And he touches her arm, and the drug comes back out of her arm, like he just some kind of mysteriously interesting way extracts it back out of her. You don't want that junk in your arm, and it comes back out. That's what this film feels like to me. It was injected into me, and then after the 45-minute period, it starts coming back out of me. But the interesting thing is I'm more interested why it's coming back out than why it went in to begin with. I don't know.
Wow.
I don't think this conversation is going to explain anything to anybody. I think it's valid that we're perplexed by it, or that I'm perplexed by it. And in the end, that's the irony. The irony is that he has us having two full-length podcast conversation about a movie that we would say wasn't good.
Yeah.
If you had to boil it down to good or bad, we would say bad.
Yeah.
If you had to boil it down to something. But here we are. We had a religious conversation that we've never had before on the podcast. We've had a philosophical conversation that we've had a couple of times. We've had some form of emotional conversation about a movie that we don't get. That's amazing. So he did something right, you know? You got to give him credit for that.
It's definitely worth something. So yeah, and I am kind of glad that we circled back on this. So we do have to keep track of things like this in the future and make sure we're willing to, to commit to these types of things again. But I'm glad we did this though. And if it weren't for this podcast and what we said in our initial podcast, I probably would not have seen this movie again, and I definitely would not have gotten as much out of it as I did the second time. So that right there is worth something, and that tells you that some movies, if they don't grab you the first time, and maybe even if they don't grab you the second time, they may be worth even a third look. So it's just, you got to carve out the time.
Well, let me ask you one last question before we start wrapping this up. Did you, watching the second time, did you think you were going to get something completely different out of it? Did you think you would finally understand it? And did you think that it would be different talking about it this time than the first time?
Well, I think that I was expecting to see like one of those like interlocking puzzles. Like I was expecting to have a puzzle with all of the pieces in place and to be able to see the complete picture. But I didn't get that. There were still missing pieces. And that pointed towards either something that was that he either was not able to do in the resources and time and things that he had with his availability, like that he just wasn't able to do that to where it didn't make a complete picture for me, or that maybe I'm just not ready to see what I'm not in the right mind frame to see what he's trying to convey. But a lot of that is on him too. Like if he's trying to convey something in a clear manner, I should be able to get that, especially coming at it with a completely open mind and coming at it with an understanding of what his motivations were when he made the movie. And it still didn't add up to a complete picture for me. So that was a little disappointing, but I'm glad I saw it again.
Well, I knew in the first 5 minutes I would feel exactly.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
I did. I'm telling you, it's not like I locked my mind down and said, I'm not going to, you can't get in me, Darren Aronofsky. I listened to that podcast twice and have seen this movie twice.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling you, the most fascinating thing about all of it is when Darren Aronofsky said that Jennifer Lawrence did not show him the character in the 3 to 4 months that they rehearsed the screenplay. She did not show it to him until she was on set and barefoot and walking in the house. And that to me was a personal triumph because, trying to be an actor or trying to pursue a hobby as an actor is a perplexing thing to me. I think I know what I'm doing, and then I go to do it and it falls completely flat and nothing happens right. And then all of a sudden something goes right and it's up and down and all the way around. And you're talking about a 4-time nominated actress and a 1-time winner who still cannot bring the character fully into focus until she's right there on set. That is way more fascinating to me than anything else that we've talked about. But that's just the actor in me. It also kind of thrills me that it shows me that how mysterious this craft of acting really is, that even these people who are on film emoting in such straightforward ways that they still have trouble getting there or still have their ways of getting there. Yeah, I don't want to get into a side conversation about that. I just thought that was fascinating. And I also wanted to see if I could see her struggling with creating this character on film. I didn't. I think she's brilliant. I always have. I always will. I mean, yeah. I do. I'm a fan. And it's a fan based on extreme talent, and she just has it. And enough said.
All right. Well, that's a good place to end it. So you can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. You can go to facebook.com/actorandengineer, and you can tweet us at actor, engineer. We'll see you next week.